Welcome to Democratic Television, a program of the Santa Clara County Democratic Party that brings our viewers the perspectives and opinions of our always thoughtful Democratic guests. Today, our focus is on state government, and our guest is former Assembly member and current candidate for State Senate, Sally Lieber. Sally, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me here.
Thank you for being with us. At the beginning of our shows, I want to talk definitely about the state Senate and the state of California and the opportunities and challenges you see ahead. But I'd like you to say a little bit about yourself. What brought you to California? What brought you to a place in life where you wanted to commit yourself to public service?
Well, thanks so much. Like you, I'm originally from the Detroit area.
Yes, I remember.
And so we have that in common. And I came to California in 1986. And to me, it was really, truly the Golden State and such a wonderful place. And I think that that's what first made me think about being engaged in public service here, was just the debt of gratitude that I have towards California. And in around 1993, my husband and I moved down from San Francisco to Mountain View. He was working in Mountain View at the time. And so I got involved in environmental pursuits around Mountain View and ran for city council and got on council and found that very rewarding and became mayor of Mountain View, something that I very much enjoyed.
Right.
And while I was mayor, I decided to run for the state assembly. And so I think I didn't really realize what a huge process it is to run at the state level, but ran a really grassroots campaign and came out well in the primary and then won the general election. And so I went up to Sacramento for 3 terms, which is all that you could do under term limits at that time.
Yes, I remember.
Yeah.
Wonderful. So your experience of being in the Detroit area, coming out to California, I do share that experience with you, and that similar sense of awe at the state of California and the opportunity and the beauty of the state. But did you feel like that some of that, like Detroit experience, the Detroit area experience, informed your life here, and particularly your political work and your public service life?
Well, I think that being from Detroit, it's easy to be a progressive Democrat in particular. And I've always had a lifelong commitment to labor and to seeing to it that working families get the best chance possible at opportunity. And so that has really been an influence on me. And I don't want to go too far back into history, but my great aunt, who was like a grandmother to me, was in one of the first sit-down strikes in the U.S. in the Woolworth store in Detroit.
Wow,
and so her photo is in the Labor Library in Detroit.
Right.
So I think that I've had that political interest always.
Yes, yes. Well, that's interesting. I remember your service. As you remember, we were near neighbors in Mountain View in the time that you were on the city council. And I remember the council of that time sort of having progressives and, I think good but less progressive members as well. And you being a leader, of course, in that progressive group. Do you remember that as being a mostly collegial time, or was there some tension and challenges in moving things in a progressive direction?
It was both. Mountain View is a smaller city that really takes on big issues. So it was very collegial. We were all very close, but we did defend our ideas pretty vigorously. And some of the things that we were working on at that time were affordable housing and how to get affordable housing in Mountain View. I think we were one of the first cities to really put a big emphasis on that. And also looking at transit and climate change. And I think that we were a leader in those terms. We're clearly a leader in having a transit-oriented downtown that's very walkable, and we put a lot of emphasis on that.
Right. Yeah, Mountain View is a pretty critical community for that part of the peninsula, I think, in terms of the mix of single-family homes and places of business and multifamily homes. And I think that does reflect a commitment over a long period of time.
Yeah. And we're one of the diverse cities in the North Peninsula, I think.
True.
And I think that's because we have about 70% of the housing is rental housing. So we have the opportunity for folks, or have had the opportunity over time, for folks to come into our community.
Right. Wonderful. Well, that's a. I know you're still very engaged in Mountain View as well, and it seems like that Mountain View and other communities in our area have been struggling with the housing and transit issues. Having some of the right ideas, and Mountain View has made a big contribution, but still under strain, and the whole area, the whole region under strain in terms of opportunities for young people and working people to find a place to live. There's the controversy in the city now about the RVs and where they could or could not be parked, and that battle about affordable housing in every community, including in Mountain View, has been hard. And it sort of feels like housing advocates have mostly been on defense, trying to protect the small enclaves of affordable housing that they have. Where do you see that going? Do you see that there having been progress, or just having been value in preserving what has been available?
Yeah, I think that that's a big question for California, and as you said, it's in every single city.
Right.
And it's really a question of whether or not we're going to reach out and accommodate all the people who are here, including people who were born and raised here,
Right.
who are looking for housing, and or whether we're going to be more exclusive as a state and as a community. And I see that so many of the cities on the peninsula are grappling with the RV issue. And to me, it's how do we shape policy so that we have compassion for individual circumstances. I've been involved in the RV issue in Mountain View, and I'm really struck by how many single women there are who are over age 50 who are finding that the only housing that they can reach is an RV. And how do we allow them to be safe within our communities?
Right.
And how do we have the compact housing that we need, the missing middle, all of these ingredients? And to my mind, no one can tell me that we can't do it in California. We're the fifth or sixth largest economy in the world, depending on how you look at it.
Right.
And we have huge cultural power worldwide. And
What do you mean by that term, cultural power?
well, I've seen over the past few years, I've done a lot of refugee relief work in Europe and et cetera. And even people who have resentments towards the U.S. love California. And California is the golden dream worldwide. And so we're a state of immigrants, we're a state of refugees, we're a state that has a can-do attitude. And we're not going to be bested by the housing crisis. We're going to really work it through and get to a point where everybody has a place here.
I remember from your assembly campaigns and other campaigns of yours that one of the constituencies that you particularly worked to activate were the mobile home parks, and that's an interesting enclaves of affordable housing. How did you come upon that? How did you get engaged with them?
Well, that was really when I was on city council, and folks who lived in our parks in Mountain View were reaching out to me, and I now have relationships with just about everybody in every park in our area, and I really treasure the people that live in the manufactured housing parks. And, so often they're the retired nurses, retired teachers, the backbone of our community. And I get little notes from people who have known me for years, who knew my mother, and et cetera. And it's just amazing how people will keep up with you in politics. I think when we think about politics, we think about the cynicism and about the ugly side of politics.
And the money.
And the money, which is a horrific side of things. But we don't look at how much hope you can exchange between people, between candidates and people who are in the community, and vice versa. And it's really a powerful thing.
I remember your first run for assembly, and there were strong candidates. There was a field of strong candidates, and there was at least one other candidate that maybe people perceived as being supported by the establishment, like the political elders or something like that. You remember this, right? Or at least that characters. And I know you had your basis of support as well. I remember you had support from organized labor and from your Mountain View community. Was that, did you feel like you were running as an outsider in that race, or was it more that you felt it was a level field and you were just able to get yourself to be compared to the candidates with whom you were competing?
Yeah, I felt like I really was an underdog, and I think that that's always a good place to run from. You need to always run scared if you're running for office, not be complacent.
Yes.
And I remember in that race, because all the money was on the other side, and we really split. Organized labor and environmental groups were split, et cetera. And we just kept walking to the households of people who lived in that district and talking with them about the campaign and why I was running. And on election night, the opposing campaign had a lovely reception set up in a wine bar, and a friend drove by there and saw huge floral arrangements and all these great preparations. And we were in our little concrete bunker of an office. And we had about 6 inches left and a big tall bag of tortilla chips, so it was all the broken pieces.
You needed the results to come in quickly enough before the tortilla chips ran out.
Well, when we started to win, we were really scared because we had no refreshments. We had been convinced that we were losing, and people started to really flood into our office. And it was anytime that you run for office and you know that people are making a judgment about you and your name is on the ballot, it's just a remarkable experience. And that night, knowing that so many people had put their trust in me was really something that I will never forget. And then I went up to Sacramento, and on day one of my tenure there was a $29.5 billion shortfall.
And that must have been exciting. I want to ask you a little bit about that and maybe compare that to the situation you might enter in now. But is there a memorable segment or precinct or location where you saw the result came in and it was in your favor and you remembered that was really valuable to you, or struck you as, wow, I made an extra effort there and really appreciated how that worked out?
Yeah, that was the first results to come in, were the absentee ballots, and I think that in general they can be more conservative than the other voters that are coming in later or voting on a provisional ballot. And I was only down by about 10% in the absentees. I thought, what in the world is going on? And then we sort of started to dig our way out of that hole. And
but what struck you about it? You felt good because the gap wasn't big and you felt you'd close it as votes came in?
Well, I thought, why am I only losing by 10%? Not 50%.
Among that part of the electorate, right?
Yeah.
Hello, my name is Clark Williams, and I'm Vice Chair of the Santa Clara County Democratic Party. I'm a lifetime Democratic activist, but there are not enough of us, and I know you're out there, and we need you to join me. I'm also a father, and I'm teaching my 6-year-old daughter to also become a Democratic activist. She needs some friends to join us too. So if you're out there and you've got kids and you're looking for something fun to do on a weekend, we really need you to come join us in helping elect Democrats in 2010. To find us or to learn more, contact area code 408-445-9500. Or you can also find us on the web at www.sccdp.org. I hope to see you soon on the campaign trail.
We're back for the second half of our conversation with former Assemblywoman and State Senate candidate Sally Lieber. Sally, before our break, you were reminding me of the history, and you were just elected to the Assembly, and I'm sure had fabulous ideas of great programs that would help people. Yet when on arrival, you learned that there was a deficit, and I assume that was tied to the state economy and the national economy. Did that put a damper on your experience? What did it? Did you have to confront hard choices? What did it leave room for you to do?
Well, it really inspired fear in a brand new member to have the largest budget shortfall of any state in U.S. history, $29.5 billion. And so I really thought, am I ever going to be able to do the kinds of legislation that I'd like to do? And I found that became really a good intellectual puzzle of how can you make things work. And I would say that also it was very emotionally rigorous being up there and making the cuts that we needed to make of that magnitude. And
This is sort of the number where it couldn't have been possible to close the gap without affecting people that you cared about in terms of programs and
absolutely.
services. Yeah.
And I was a shadow conferee on the budget conference committee, so sort of an understudy on that committee for several years. And so we would go through the state budget line by line. So you really had an understanding of what you were cutting and the impact that it would have on people's lives. And it was a very tough time. And I think it gives me a unique qualification in potentially going into the state Senate. In having lived through those times and seeing what can be done and the kinds of reserves that you need to have now going forward to prevent that from ever happening again.
Right. It's sort of like the generation that lived through through the Depression. I think they were frugal and careful and creative in the course of their lives. What's an example of something that you're proud to have been able to do, despite really not probably as a freshman in those economic circumstances being able to bring forward many programs that would cost much money?
Well, starting in those times, I fought a 3-year battle to raise the state's minimum wage. And at that time, the state legislature had never raised the wage on their own.
Wow.
It had only ever been done through the Industrial Welfare Commission, which no longer existed.
Right.
And so under a Republican governor, I was able to get a $1.25 an hour increase in the state minimum wage,
Wow.
which is $19 a week for the lowest wage earning Californians.
Yeah. Now that was another crazy thing that happened in that era. In that the Republican governor you're referring to is Arnold Schwarzenegger, right?
Yes.
How was it to work with him, and how did you figure out, and not both you and the kind of more political class collectively figure out how to work with him to get things done?
Well, when he came in, I think that he felt that we would be fans of him in terms of his work professionally and in terms of his work politically. And it was a real process for him to understand that we may love his movies, but we're not going to necessarily agree on policy. And we're going to fight for the things that we think are really important for California. What I think that people don't understand about him is his intelligence, is his interest in policy, and his personal involvement. And there were many times when I would get a call usually in the late afternoon. He'd like to see you about this bill or that bill. Can you come down? And so he was really looking at legislation and reading it through, which
He
was
was
heartening.
engaged. Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting. Sally, when you were there, you had the opportunity to be in leadership in the assembly. How did that come about, and what was the role, and what did it afford you an opportunity to do?
Well, very quickly after getting there, I realized that I never really wanted to chair a committee. And what I wanted to do was be Speaker Pro Tem and run the House.
Right, you wanted to be in charge. Now,
Yeah.
did you think it would be tedious to run a committee, or did you just feel that you'd be able to, your interests were too varied to focus on one thing as so much? Or?
Well, I knew that I would have a very large bill load of my own legislation, and a lot of what committee chairs are required to do is work on other members' bills. And I had very definite ideas about the kinds of environmental bills, the kinds of opportunity bills that I wanted to pursue. So I really felt I don't want to use a huge part of my day negotiating other bills.
Right.
And I really loved being Speaker Pro Tem because you have oversight over everything that happens in the House and all of the sessions. And so it's actually very interesting just to know every single bill.
Right. Did you have to convince the speaker to entrust that position to you, or?
Yes, yeah. I started out with the gal who was Speaker Pro Tem at the time when I came in, and I would run and get her sodas and whip votes for her and run things back to the Speaker's office and just make myself helpful in every single way.
Right.
And started working with the Speaker too. And part of being Speaker Pro Tem is being part of the leadership team. It's just about 10 chairs of key committees plus the Speaker Pro Tem. And I really love that because you really are in on the strategy of what we should be doing as Democrats.
Right. Fabulous. Very interesting. So you mentioned that you were served in the time when there were the more restrictive term limits, and you served your full 3 terms that you were permitted to serve. And that regime pitted a lot of members against each other, basically in trying to move on to the state Senate because that was the only path that was available. And I know you had a previous run for the state Senate seat that you're running for now, but it must be a very different experience now. And what differences do you see and feel in running now as opposed to the first time?
Well, I think that now people who are in the Assembly or the Senate have the luxury of 12 years in either house. So it's a reduced number of years. I can do 2 4-year terms in the state Senate still.
Yeah.
So it's a reduced number of years overall, but it has stabilized some of that movement around between the houses.
Yeah.
And I think that it's still a money-driven system, unfortunately. I've done a lot of work on the clean money campaign side of things. It's still very much a money-driven system, and in some ways, the stability of being in one house can exacerbate that. And I think that members can become a little bit too used to working with particular interest groups. But I'm impressed by the policy that I see coming out of the state legislature right now on renters' rights and questions about rent control and et cetera. And also on really issues that have been deferred for a long time, like police use of force.
Right.
So I'm very impressed with the policy depth. But now under the new 12 years in either house, we're seeing that assembly members are staying in the house that they're in. And so people are running for the state Senate as freshmen.
Right.
And
And some without Sacramento experience, which probably cuts both ways, would you say?
Yeah, definitely. And it is hard to represent a district. It was hard for me when I went in and represented a district of 440,000.
Yeah, wow.
The Senate seats are now 980,000, so they're larger than a congressional seat in terms of the number of constituents.
Yeah.
And it's hard to come in.
If it were a city, it would be something like, one of the top 15 or 20 cities in the country, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And it's hard to come in and know exactly how to represent those communities, different communities within a district, to do the constituent casework at a really comprehensive level, and to know the legislative process, which can take time to learn.
I'm sure. Given the situation you see in Sacramento and kind of current economics and budget situation, what do you see as like the first opportunity you'd like to pursue as a state senator, broadly or specifically?
Yeah, I think that we need to address the climate collapse, and we need electrification of buildings and vehicle fleet, truck fleet, everything that we possibly can. To do that, obviously, we need to reform the grid in California. It's an antiquated grid that was based on a situation that doesn't exist anymore.
Right.
And then I think that we need to look at increasing education and opportunity in our state, be among the top 5 and not the bottom 5 in terms of education funding. And then,
is that just on the education front? Because I agree with you. We can no longer sustain the level of investment we've been making in education. What do you see as the commitment that needs to be made there? Is it simply we need to spend more money and then use it wisely, or is it changing priorities that we have within the resources that we have now?
I think that we have to change priorities and to get new resources into the system. I think that we need a wealth tax for California to go to funding education. And that's just something that has to happen for our future. And I think that we also need to do more housing as we talked about, the gentrification crisis is real
Right.
in California, in our communities. We see the impact here locally.
Yes.
And,
And we're starting to hear about the impact in communities that, even folks around here would think of as being affordable. Oakland, for example.
yeah, and we can't just push out further and further into
Right.
the Central Valley.
Yeah, we'll all be on our cars forever.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that we also need to do more work on our addiction to incarceration and to pursue decarceration of individuals that should not be in prison and really take back some of that money for education and get a better result.
Right. Good. Well, I'm sure you're hopeful about the opportunity to go to Sacramento, and wish you the best of luck in your campaign. Thank you for
Thanks a
sharing
lot.
all of the thoughts that you've shared with us today. How do you feel about the governor? Do you think is the governor the one you can work with on the priorities that you have?
Oh, absolutely. I think that this governor is just a dream to have in office. I mean, just his action on a moratorium on the death penalty, it's clear that he's thinking the right way for California.
Yes, and
And-
bold in a way that I think will be needed on some of these issues.
Yeah,
like
bold,
climate.
and I think that he really understands what we need to do environmentally in California and is willing to do those things, and understands that we are a state mostly of people of modest means,
Fabulous.
and so extending opportunity is a big play here.
True. If folks wanted to contact you and learn about your campaign, what would they do?
Yeah, I'd love to have them visit our website at votesally.org.
VoteSally.org.
Very
good.
easy.
Yeah. Thank you so much for our conversation today.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us on Democratic Television. You can find information about the Democratic Party on our website, which is sccdp.org, or give us a call at 408-445-9500. We'll see you on the campaign trail.